Sometimes running from your past means finding a place so quiet, even your own regrets can't follow you there. For 23 years, that's exactly what Lorna Bell tried to do on Killdeer Ridge. She built a life in those mountains, far from people and the mistakes that still had her name on them. She knew every trail, every creek, every corner of those woods. But one morning, while tracking an elk, she stumbled on something she'd never seen before, a rusted shed hidden in the trees, covered in moss and thyme. The door was barely hanging on. Inside, beneath years of dust, Lorna found something that changed everything. What was hidden in that shed that would bring people back to the mountain after all these years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at 7,200 feet, tucked into a fold of Douglas fir and lodgepole pine where the wind couldn't reach it in winter. Lorna Bell had built it herself, or most of it anyway, 23 years back when her hands were steadier and her reasons for leaving town were still raw enough to fuel long days of work. The logs came from deadfall she'd hauled up the old logging road with a borrowed truck. The roof was corrugated metal, painted forest green so it wouldn't catch the sun and give her position away to anyone looking up from the valley. Not that many people looked anymore. Not that many people cared where Lorna Bell had gone. She woke before dawn most days, the way she always had. October mornings on Killdeer Ridge came cold and sharp, the kind of cold that made you grateful for wool socks and a wood stove that held its heat through the night. She dressed in layers, thermal undershirt, flannel, a canvas jacket worn soft at the elbows, and laced up her boots while the coffee percolated on the stove. The cabin smelled like pine resin and wood smoke, coffee, and the faint musk of the deer hide she'd been tanning on the porch. Outside, the world was grey and still. Fog clung to the trees, turning the forest into something ghostly, and the only sound was the distant call of a raven somewhere down the ridge. Lorna poured her coffee into a dented tin cup and stood on the porch, looking out over land she knew better than she'd ever known another person. Every game trail, every seasonal creek, every cluster of huckleberry bushes where the bears fed in late summer. This was her territory. She'd earned it through years of walking, watching, learning the rhythms of a place most folks only saw from the highway far below. Her daily routine rarely changed. After coffee, she'd check the snares she kept for rabbits and grouse, then make a wider loop to inspect the area for signs of predators or injured animals. She hunted when she needed to, fished the creek when the salmon ran, and kept a small garden plot near the cabin where she grew potatoes, carrots, and herbs that could survive the short mountain summer. It wasn't an easy life, but it was hers. Nobody told her what to do. Nobody judged her for things she couldn't change. The elk had been on her mind for 3 days now. She'd first spotted its tracks near the eastern ridge, where the land dropped away into a canyon thick with alder and devil's club. The prints were deep, uneven, the gait too wide. Something was wrong with it. She'd found scat that was loose, pale, and she'd seen where it had bedded down in a thicket of young fir, the ground torn up like it had struggled to rise. A sick elk was dangerous, unpredictable, and if it died near one of the creeks, it could foul the water she depended on, so she tracked it. That's what you did when you lived this way. You paid attention. You took responsibility for the land that kept you alive. The maps she kept were hand-drawn, updates to the old Forest Service charts she'd bought in town years ago. She marked water sources, game trails, good campsites, places where the snow drifted deep in winter. The shed wasn't on any of them. She'd walked that part of the ridge 100 times, or thought she had, but the elk's trail had taken her down a slope she usually avoided because it was too steep, too choked with undergrowth. And there it was, sagging into the hillside, like it had grown there, like the forest was trying to swallow it whole. She didn't go inside that first day, just circled it, looking for tracks, for any sign that someone else knew it was there. But the moss on the roof was thick and unbroken. The door hung crooked, rusted hinges holding it barely in place. No footprints, no disturbed ground. It had been alone for a long time. Lorna thought about it all the way back to the cabin, thought about it through dinner, fried trout and potatoes, eaten standing at the counter, because sitting down felt too formal when you lived alone. Thought about it while she oiled her rifle and banked the fire for the night. She didn't sleep well. The next morning she went back. Town was a word she used sparingly, even in her own thoughts. Ridgeline sat in the valley 12 miles down the mountain, a place where the highway bent north toward the interstate, and the timber companies still owned most of the land. Population 2,000, give or take, depending on the season and whether the mill was hiring. She'd been born there, grew up there, left there under circumstances she didn't let herself think about most days. Her brother's name was Michael. He'd been 2 years younger, 21 when he died, and for 23 years Lorna had carried the weight of what the town thought happened to him. Accidental drowning, the sheriff's report said. Drunk, alone, slipped on the rocks by Coldwater Creek and never made it out. There'd been a funeral, there'd been whispers, and there'd been Lorna standing in the back of the church, watching faces that wouldn't meet her eyes. She'd tried to tell them Michael wasn't drunk that night. Tried to tell them he'd been scared, that something was wrong, that he'd been acting strange all summer and wouldn't tell her why. But nobody wanted to hear it. Easier to write him off as troubled, reckless, one more young man who didn't know his limits. Easier than asking questions that might not have comfortable answers. So Lorna left. Sold what little she had, bought supplies, and drove up the mountain. She told herself she'd stay a season, maybe 2, just long enough for people to forget about her. But seasons turned into years, and forgetting turned out to be something she was better at than the folks down in Ridgeline. She still went to town twice a year, sometimes 3 times if winter was hard. She'd drive her old pickup down the logging road, park behind the general store, and buy what she couldn't make or grow herself: flour, salt, kerosene, ammunition. She kept her head down, paid in cash, and left. Mr. Talbot, who ran the store, was decent enough. He didn't ask questions, didn't gossip, just rang up her supplies and wished her well. Most others avoided her, or stared just long enough to remind her they remembered. Sheriff Pritchard remembered. She could feel it every time their paths crossed, which wasn't often, but was still too much. He'd been a deputy back when Michael died, young and ambitious, eager to close cases and move up the ranks. Now he wore the sheriff's star and drove a new truck with county plates. And he looked at Lorna like she was something that should have stayed buried. The morning she went back to the shed, the sky was low and threatening rain. She carried a flashlight, a pry bar, and her rifle, though she wasn't sure what she expected to find. The door gave way easier than she thought it would, scraping across a floor thick with old leaves and dirt. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of rust and rot. Light came through gaps in the walls, slanting lines of grey that showed her workbenches, shelves, the remnants of someone's long-abandoned project. She found tools first. A handsaw with a rusted blade, a coil of chain, old tin cans that might have held nails or screws, now empty except for spider webs. Someone had used this place once. Someone had needed it out here, away from everything, and then walked away and never come back. Or maybe they hadn't walked away. The metal box was under a tarp in the corner, a green canvas tarp that had gone stiff with age and mildew. She pulled it back carefully, half expecting to find something alive underneath, but there was only the box. It was the size of a tackle box, the kind with a simple latch and a place for a padlock that had rusted away to nothing. The latch opened with a snap that echoed in the small space. Inside was a photograph. Lorna's hands went still. She lifted it out, held it up to the light, coming through the door. 4 people stood in front of a truck, young, smiling. Summer somewhere behind them in the bright green of the trees. She recognized her brother immediately. Michael, 19 or 20 maybe, skinnier than she remembered, but with that same crooked grin he used to wear when he thought he was getting away with something. Next to him, 2 other young men she didn't know, both in work clothes, both with the sun-dark skin of people who spent their days outside. And a girl, pretty, dark-haired, standing just apart from the others, like she wasn't quite sure she belonged in the picture. Lorna turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded blue ink, summer 1999, 26 years ago. The summer before Michael died, her heart was beating too fast. She set the photograph down gently, like it might break, and looked at the other things in the box. Her driver's license expired, the plastic yellowed and cracked. The face in the photo was one of the young men from the picture, Dennis Vogel, age 22. An address in some town she'd never heard of, 3 hours south. There was a folded piece of paper, a map of the ridge, with several locations marked. In pencil, an old watch, the crystal cracked, a pocket knife, and at the bottom, a key ring with 2 keys that looked like they belonged to a truck. Lorna sat back on her heels. Her brother was in this photograph. Her brother had known these people, and someone had hidden this box, hidden this shed, hidden all of it, where no one was meant to find it. She thought about the way Michael had changed that summer. The way he'd started staying out late, coming home with dirt on his clothes and worry in his eyes. The way he'd stopped talking to her about anything that mattered. She thought it was just him growing up, pulling away the way younger brothers did. She thought it was normal. Now she looked at the photograph and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Wondered what these other people had been to him, and why their belongings were rotting in a shed on Killdeer Ridge. She took the photograph and the driver's license, left everything else where it was, closed the door of the shed, and walked back to her cabin, with her mind working in directions it hadn't moved in years. That night, she sat at her table with the photograph in front of her and let herself remember things she'd spent 23 years trying to forget. Michael's face the last time she saw him. The way he'd hugged her, held on just a little too long, like he was saying goodbye to more than just the evening. The way he'd said, "If something happens, Lorna, just know I tried to do the right thing." She'd thought he was being dramatic. She'd thought he was young and confused and maybe a little drunk. She hadn't thought he was afraid for his life. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending a shower of pine needles across the roof. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the metal in a rhythm that sounded like a warning. Lorna stared at the photograph until the faces blurred and her coffee went cold. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a door she'd kept locked for 2 decades started to swing open. She needed to know who Dennis Vogel was. She needed to know what happened that summer. And she needed to know if her brother's death had been an accident at all, or if the town had been lying to her all these years. The only way to find out was to go back to Ridgeline. The thought made her stomach twist. But she looked at Michael's face in the photograph, young and alive and trusting, and she knew she didn't have a choice. Some things, once you started digging at them, wouldn't let you rest until you reached the bottom. The elk was still out there somewhere. Lorna knew that because she could feel it the way you feel a storm coming, that sense of something wrong in the natural order. But the elk would have to wait. She had other tracks to follow now. She spent the night at her table, the photograph and the license laid out in front of her like evidence at a trial. She studied every detail, the background, the truck, the expressions on their faces. Michael looked happy in the picture, genuinely happy, and that hurt worse than anything because she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen him smile like that in person. Not in those final weeks. Not when he was scared and secretive and wouldn't tell her why. The other 2 men were harder to read. One was tall, broad-shouldered, with a mustache and a baseball cap pulled low. The other was wiry, darker-haired, with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops like he was trying to look more confident than he felt. The girl stood at the edge of the frame, her arms crossed, her smile polite but distant. None of them looked like they belonged together. Not really. They looked like people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and were making the best of it. Dennis Vogel. The name meant nothing to her. She'd never heard Michael mention it, never seen mail or phone calls from anyone by that name. But he'd been important enough to be in this photograph, and his belongings were important enough to hide. That meant something. That meant everything. When dawn came, grey and cold, Lorna made her decision. She packed a small bag, enough for a day or 2 in case she couldn't make it back before dark. She loaded the truck with her rifle and her supplies, and she tucked the photograph and license into the breast pocket of her jacket where they'd stay dry. Then she started the engine, let it warm, and began the long drive down the mountain. The logging road was rough, rutted from years of neglect and seasonal runoff. It took her an hour to reach the highway, and another 20 minutes to get into Ridgeline proper. The town hadn't changed much. Same faded storefronts, same grain elevator at the edge of the rail yard, same tired look of a place that had been dying slowly for 30 years. The mill still operated, but on reduced shifts, and most of the young people left as soon as they could. What remained were the stubborn, the stuck, and the old folks who'd been born here and figured they'd die here too. She parked behind the general store, same as always, cut the engine and sat for a moment, gathering herself. It had been 4 months since her last trip down, and that had been quick, in and out in under an hour. This time would be different. This time she'd have to talk to people, ask questions, make herself visible in ways that invited attention. The bell over the door jingled when she walked in. Mr. Talbot looked up from behind the counter, gave her a nod. He was in his 70s now, a little more stooped than last time, but still steady on his feet. "Lorna," he said. "Wasn't expecting you till December. Wasn't expecting to come," she said. "Needed some things." She moved through the narrow aisles, picking up items she didn't really need. A can of coffee, a bag of flour, some batteries. Anything to make it look normal. But her ears were tuned to the voices at the front of the store, 2 women she didn't recognize, talking in low tones. "I heard someone saw lights up on the ridge," one of them said. "Thought maybe it was hunters, but it's not the season." "Could be Lorna Bell," the other replied. "She lives up there, doesn't she? If you can call it living." They didn't say it cruelly, just matter-of-factly, like she was a piece of local folklore that occasionally wandered into view. Lorna kept her expression neutral, kept shopping, but her instincts prickled. Someone had been watching. Someone had noticed. She brought her items to the counter. Mr. Talbot rang them up without comment. But as she was pulling cash from her wallet, he leaned in slightly. "Folks have been asking about you," he said quietly. "Past few days. Wondering if you'd been down the mountain lately." "Who's been asking?" "Can't say for certain. Strangers mostly. Said they were interested in the old logging sites up there. But they seemed more interested in you." Lorna's hand stilled over the bills. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing to tell. I don't know your business, and I don't share what I don't know." He handed her the receipt. "Just thought you should be aware." She nodded, took her bag, and left. Outside, the air felt too close, too watched. She put the bag in the truck bed and stood there for a moment, scanning the street. A few cars parked along the curb, a couple walking into the diner. Nothing obviously wrong. But the feeling didn't leave. The library was 3 blocks away, a small brick building that had been there since before she was born. She hadn't been inside in years, but she remembered it, the smell of old paper, the quiet, the rows of books nobody read anymore. It seemed like as good a place as any to start looking for answers. The door was unlocked. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through tall windows that hadn't been cleaned in a while. There was a desk near the entrance, but no one sat behind it. Lorna moved deeper into the building, past shelves of fiction and reference books, toward the back where she remembered they kept the archives. She found them in a small room off the main floor. Boxes of old newspapers, folders of local records, a microfiche machine that looked like it hadn't been used in a decade. She started with the newspapers, pulling out editions from 26 years ago, from the summer of 1999. It took her an hour to find it. A small article buried on page 3 of the local section. The headline read, "Local man reported missing. Dennis Vogel, aged 22, had been working seasonal logging jobs in the area. He'd been staying at a boarding house on the south edge of town, paying by the week. According to his landlady, he'd left one morning in early August and never came back. His truck was gone. His belongings were still in his room. Search parties went out for 2 weeks, covering the forests and creeks around Ridgeline, but found nothing. Eventually the search was called off. The prevailing theory was that he'd moved on, found work elsewhere, didn't bother to collect his things. Lorna read the article 3 times. Dennis Vogel disappeared in August 1999. Michael died in November 1999. 3 months. She kept searching. Found Michael's obituary, brief and formal. Found the sheriff's report that called his death an accident. Found a quote from Sheriff Pritchard, who'd been a deputy at the time, saying there was no evidence of foul play and that Michael Bell had a history of making poor choices. That line made her jaw tighten. Michael had been a good kid, a little reckless maybe, the way all young men are, but not self-destructive. Not the kind to drink himself into drowning. She was so focused on the newspapers that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a voice said, "Lorna." She turned sharply. A woman stood in the doorway, older, white-haired, with glasses on a chain around her neck. It took Lorna a moment to place her. Mrs. Kopp, the librarian. She'd aged, but her eyes were still sharp. "I thought that was you," Mrs. Kopp said. "It's been a long time." "It has." Mrs. Kopp stepped into the room, her gaze moving to the open newspaper on the table. "You're looking into Dennis Vogel." It wasn't a question. Lorna didn't bother denying it. "Did you know him?" "No, but I remember when he went missing. Caused quite a stir for a few weeks. Then people moved on." She paused. "Your brother came in here too." "That same summer. He was looking for the same name." Lorna's breath caught. "Michael was here?" "Several times. Late July, early August. He was researching something, wouldn't tell me what. But he asked for the same newspapers, the same records." Mrs. Kopp's expression softened. "He seemed frightened, Lorna. I asked if he needed help, but he said he had to handle it himself." "Did he find anything?" "I don't know. He stopped coming after August. And then, in November," she didn't finish. "Didn't need to." Lorna looked back at the newspaper. Her brother had been here. Her brother had been investigating Dennis Vogel's disappearance. And 3 months later, he was dead. "Why are you telling me this?" Lorna asked. Mrs. Kopp adjusted her glasses. "Because your brother was a good boy. And because I never believed what they said about him. Some of us didn't." She turned to leave, then paused. "Be careful, Lorna. If you're digging into this, you're digging into things people wanted buried." After she left, Lorna sat alone in the archive room. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they made was darker than she'd expected. Michael had been investigating Dennis Vogel's disappearance. He'd found something, or thought he had, and then he died, accidental drowning. That's what they'd said. Lorna didn't believe it anymore. She gathered the newspapers, made copies of the relevant pages on the old machine. As she was leaving the library, she glanced up and down the street. A truck sat across from the diner, engine off, windows tinted. She couldn't see inside, but she felt eyes on her. She walked to her own truck, climbed in, and started the engine. The other truck didn't move. She pulled onto the street, drove 2 blocks, turned left toward the highway. In her rearview mirror, the truck followed. Sheriff Pritchard was waiting for her at the edge of town, his cruiser parked sideways across the shoulder. Lorna had no choice but to stop. She rolled down her window as he approached, his face set in an expression that might have been concern if it had reached his eyes. "Lorna Bell," he said. "Wasn't expecting to see you down here today, just picking up supplies. That all?" He leaned against her truck, too casual, too familiar. "Heard you've been asking questions at the library. Didn't know reading was illegal." His smile didn't waver. "It's not. But stirring up old business can be, especially when that business involves people who'd rather leave the past where it is. People like you. People like a lot of folks in this town." He straightened, hooked his thumbs into his belt. "Your brother's death was an accident, Lorna. It was investigated, closed, done. No amount of digging is going to change that. Maybe I'm not trying to change it. Maybe I just want to understand it. Some things are better left alone." She met his eyes, saw something flicker there, fear, maybe, or guilt, buried under years of authority and confidence. "Why do you care what I look into?" "Because I don't want to see you hurt." He said it smoothly, but it landed wrong, too rehearsed. The mountain's a dangerous place for someone on their own. Be a shame if something happened to you. It wasn't a warning. "It was a threat." Lorna didn't respond. She just rolled up her window, put the truck in gear and drove. Pritchard didn't follow, but she watched him in the mirror until she was back on the highway. His cruiser stayed put, a dark shape against the fading light. By the time she reached the logging road, the sun was setting behind the ridge, painting the sky red and orange. She drove up the mountain slowly, her mind working through everything she'd learned. Dennis Vogel had disappeared. Michael had been investigating. And now, 26 years later, someone was watching. Someone didn't want her asking questions. That meant the truth was still dangerous. That meant it was still out there, waiting. When she reached her cabin, she locked the door behind her for the first time in years. Lorna didn't sleep that night. She sat at her table with the photograph and the driver's license laid out in front of her, a kerosene lamp throwing shadows across the walls. Every sound outside made her reach for the rifle propped against the chair. Branches scraping the roof, an owl calling from the ridge, the wind moving through the trees like something breathing. She'd lived alone for 23 years and never felt afraid in this cabin. Now she couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were too thin, the windows too exposed, the darkness outside too full of things she couldn't see. She studied the photograph until her eyes ached. Her brother's face, that crooked smile. He'd been happy that day, or at least pretending to be. But she knew Michael, knew the way he held tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes didn't quite match his grin when something was bothering him. Even in this frozen moment, she could see it, the worry underneath. The other two men were strangers. One looked like a foreman, the kind of guy who did hard work and wore it proudly. The other looked younger, uncertain, like he hadn't quite figured out who he was supposed to be yet. And the girl at the edge of the frame, dark hair, pretty, her arms crossed like she was protecting herself from something. Who were they? What had brought them together? And why had Michael been with them? She turned Dennis Vogel's driver's license over in her hands. 22 years old when he disappeared. Brown hair, brown eyes, 5'10", 160 pounds. The address listed was in a town called Fairmont, south of Ridgeline, near the state border. The license had expired 25 years ago, which meant it had been current when he went missing. Mrs. Kopp had said Michael came to the library looking for information on Dennis Vogel. That meant Michael knew he'd disappeared. That meant he suspected something was wrong. And if the timeline was right, Michael started investigating in July, maybe early August, and Dennis vanished in August. Had Michael witnessed something? Had he been involved somehow? The thought made her stomach turn. Michael wouldn't have hurt anyone. He wasn't capable of that. But he could have seen something, could have known something, could have been trying to make it right. She remembered his last words to her. If something happens, just know I tried to do the right thing. He'd been trying to tell her, and she hadn't listened. By the time dawn broke, she'd made a decision. She needed to know more about Dennis Vogel. She needed to find out who he was, where he came from, and who might have wanted him gone. The library had given her a starting point, but it wasn't enough. She needed to go deeper. She needed help, and she needed to go back to town. The drive down the mountain felt different in daylight. Less ominous maybe, but no less tense. She kept checking her mirrors, watching for the truck that had followed her yesterday, but the road stayed empty. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew where she was, what she was doing, what she was thinking. Pritchard's warning echoed in her head. Some things are better left alone. She'd spent 23 years leaving things alone. Look where that had gotten her. She parked in the same spot behind the general store, but this time she didn't go inside. Instead, she walked 2 blocks to the diner, a place she hadn't entered since before Michael died. It looked the same. Chrome and vinyl, booths along the windows, a counter with stools that spun. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hit her as soon as she opened the door. A few heads turned when she walked in. She recognized some of the faces, older now but still familiar. Nobody spoke to her. She took a booth in the back, away from the windows, and waited. A waitress came over, a young woman Lorna didn't know. "Coffee, please. And eggs, if you've got them. Scrambled." The waitress nodded and left. Lorna sat with her back to the wall, watching the room. Most folks went back to their meals, but a man at the counter kept glancing her way. Mid-50s, work clothes, a face weathered by sun and years. She didn't recognize him, but the way he looked at her suggested he recognized her. Her food came. She ate slowly, mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She was halfway through when the man from the counter stood, walked over, and slid into the booth across from her. "Lorna Bell," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel being sifted. "It's been a long time." She set down her fork. "Do I know you?" "You might not remember. Name's Cole Finnegan. I worked with your brother back in '99. Summer logging crew." Her pulse quickened. She kept her expression neutral. "That so?" "Yeah." He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Look, I heard you've been asking questions. About Dennis Vogel. Word travels fast. In a town this size? Always does." He glanced toward the counter, then back at her. "I wanted to talk to you before things get complicated." "Complicated how?" Cole rubbed his jaw. "Dennis Vogel worked with us that summer. Me, him, your brother, a few other guys. We were cutting timber up on the ridge. Legal contract, or so we thought. Turned out the company was cutting outside the permitted zones. Old-growth timber on federal land. Big money in it, but illegal as hell. Dennis figured it out first. Started asking questions, talking about going to the authorities. Lorna's hands went still. "What happened?" Cole's eyes dropped to the table. "There was an argument. Dennis wanted to report it. The rest of us, we didn't want to lose our jobs. It got heated. Things were said, and then he stopped." Lorna leaned forward. "Then what?" "He disappeared. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. Truck was gone, stuff left behind. We figured he just took off, didn't want the trouble." But he looked up at her. "Your brother didn't think so. Michael kept saying something was wrong. Said Dennis wouldn't just leave. He started digging into it, asking around, making people nervous." "Who? Who got nervous?" "The guys running the operation. The company. The sheriff's office." Cole's voice dropped. "Your brother found something, Lorna. I don't know what, but he found something. And then he ended up dead. The diner seemed too quiet, too still. Lorna could hear her own heartbeat. You think someone killed him. It wasn't a question." Cole didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely a whisper. "I think your brother knew what happened to Dennis Vogel, and I think someone made sure he couldn't tell anybody." Lorna's hands curled into fists under the table. "Why are you telling me this now? After 26 years? Because I've been living with it. Because I should have said something back then, and I didn't. And because if you keep digging, you need to know what you're walking into." He slid out of the booth, stood. "There are people in this town who don't want this coming out. Powerful people. People who've spent decades making sure nobody asks the wrong questions." "Like who?" But Cole was already walking away. At the door, he paused, looked back. "The old logging shed on the East Ridge. You've been there, haven't you?" She didn't answer. "Didn't need to. Be careful, Lorna. That place has secrets. And secrets have a way of burying the people who dig them up." Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him. Lorna sat alone in the booth, her food forgotten. Her mind raced, putting pieces together. Dennis Vogel had discovered illegal logging. He'd threatened to report it. He disappeared. Michael investigated. Michael died, and now, all these years later, someone was watching her, warning her, trying to stop her from uncovering what had been hidden. She paid her bill and left. Outside, the street was quiet. The sun was high now, burning off the morning fog, but the light felt harsh, exposing. She walked quickly back to her truck, got in, started the engine, and then she saw it. A piece of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. She got out, pulled it free. It was a note, handwritten in shaky script. "Stop asking questions. This is your only warning." Her hands didn't shake. Her breath stayed steady. But inside, something cold and hard settled into place. Someone wanted her to stop. Someone was afraid of what she might find. That meant she was close. She crumpled the note, shoved it into her pocket, and drove out of town. This time, she didn't take the highway back to the logging road. She took the long route, winding through back roads, checking her mirrors, making sure nobody followed. When she finally reached her cabin, the sun was setting. She unloaded her rifle, checked the perimeter, locked the door. Then she sat at her table and pulled out the photograph again. 4 people, 1 missing, 1 dead. 2 still alive. Cole Finnegan had just told her the truth, or part of it. But there were still pieces missing. She needed to know who else was in that photograph. She needed to know who had written the note. And she needed to know if Dennis Vogel's body was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. She looked at the driver's license again. Dennis Vogel from Fairmont. Maybe he had family there. Maybe someone was still looking for him, still wondering what happened to the boy who left home and never came back. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd find out. Tonight she'd keep watch, keep the rifle close, keep the door locked, and if someone came for her in the darkness, she'd be ready. Morning came with frost on the windows, and a clarity Lorna hadn't felt in days. She knew what she had to do. The library had given her a name. Cole Finnegan had given her context. Now she needed the full story, and that meant going to Fairmont. The drive would take 3 hours, maybe more, if the weather turned. She packed a bag, water, some dried meat, the photograph, Dennis Vogel's license, and her rifle. She didn't know what she'd find in Fairmont, but she'd learned long ago that preparation kept you alive in uncertain situations. The truck started reluctantly in the cold. She let it idle while she made one last check of the cabin, banking the fire, securing the windows. Part of her wondered if she'd be back by nightfall. Another part wondered if she'd be back at all. The road down the mountain was easier this time, familiar, but her mind was already ahead, working through possibilities. If Dennis Vogel had family in Fairmont, they might remember him. They might know about his disappearance, might have kept searching long after the authorities gave up. Or they might have moved on, accepted that he was gone, built lives around the empty space he left behind. Either way, she had to try. The highway stretched south through timber country, past small towns that looked like Ridgeline's smaller, sadder cousins. The radio picked up a country station for a while, then static, then nothing. Lorna drove in silence, watching the landscape change from mountain forest to rolling hills, to the flatter farmland that marked the approach to Fairmont. The town was larger than Ridgeline, but not by much. Main Street had a courthouse, a few shops, a post office with an American flag snapping in the wind. She parked near the courthouse and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She couldn't just walk up to someone and ask about a man who'd been missing for 26 years. She needed to be careful, methodical. The post office seemed like a good start. Small towns, people knew each other. Someone would remember the Vogels. Inside, a woman in her 60s stood behind the counter sorting mail. She looked up when Lorna entered, offered a polite smile. "Help you?" "I hope so," Lorna said. She pulled out Dennis Vogel's license, set it on the counter. "I'm trying to find information about this man." "Dennis Vogel. He used to live here." The woman picked up the license, studied it. Her expression shifted, surprise, then something sadder. "Dennis Vogel, I haven't heard that name in years." "You knew him?" "Knew of him. He was a few years younger than me, but it's a small town. Everyone knew the Vogels." She handed the license back. "His sister might still be around." "Joanne Vogel. She never married, kept the family name?" "Last I heard, she was living in the house where they grew up, just outside town." Lorna's pulse quickened. "Could you tell me how to find it?" The woman gave her directions. A rural route, a red mailbox, a house set back from the road. As Lorna turned to leave, the woman called after her. "If you're bringing news about Dennis, just be gentle with her." She never stopped looking. The house was exactly where the woman said it would be. A small farmhouse, white paint peeling, surrounded by fields that looked like they hadn't been worked in years. A red mailbox with Vogel painted on the side in faded letters. Lorna pulled into the gravel driveway, cut the engine. For a moment she just sat there, uncertain. What would she say? How do you tell someone you might know what happened to their brother after 26 years of silence? Before she could decide, the front door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, late 60s, grey hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. She watched Lorna with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Lorna got out of the truck slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Joanne Vogel?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Lorna Bell. I'm from Ridgeline. I found something that belonged to your brother." Joanne's expression changed. She came down the porch steps, moving quickly now. "What did you find?" Lorna pulled out the license, held it up. Joanne took it with trembling hands, stared at it like it was a photograph of Dennis himself. "Where?" Her voice cracked. Where did you find this? In a shed on Killdeer Ridge, hidden. Joanne looked up at her. I received a letter 2 weeks ago, anonymous. It said, "The shed on Killdeer Ridge holds the truth about your brother. I tried to hire someone to check, but everyone I asked refused when they heard where it was." Her eyes were wet now. "I was going to go myself, but I'm not able to make that climb anymore." Lorna felt something shift inside her. This woman had been waiting, searching, hoping for answers just like she had. They were tied together by the same tragedy, the same loss. "Can I come inside?" Lorna asked. "There's more you need to know." They sat at Joanne's kitchen table, two women who'd been strangers an hour ago, but now shared something deeper than acquaintance. Lorna told her about finding the shed, about the photograph, about her brother Michael, and how he'd been investigating Dennis's disappearance before he died. Joanne listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. When Lorna finished, she stood and left the room. She came back a moment later with a shoebox, set it on the table. "Dennis wrote letters," Joanne said. "Every week when he was away working. I saved them all." She opened the box, pulled out envelopes yellowed with age. The top few were postmarked from Ridgeline, dated July and August 1999. She handed them to Lorna. "Read the last ones. They'll tell you what I've known for 26 years. Lorna opened the first letter. Dennis's handwriting was neat, careful. He talked about the logging work, the crew, the good pay. He mentioned the foreman, a man named Ray Sutton, and another worker named Cole Finnegan. He said the work was hard but honest. The next letter was different. Dated late July. "Something's not right here, Joe. The crew is cutting in areas that don't match the maps they showed us. I asked Cole about it, and he got nervous, told me not to worry about it. But I'm worried. I think we're cutting on protected land. If that's true, this whole operation is illegal." The third letter, dated early August, was shorter. "I confronted the foreman today, Ray Sutton. He admitted they've been cutting old-growth timber on federal land for months. Said the money's too good to pass up. I told him I was going to report it. He said that would be a mistake. Some of the guys are getting nervous. There's a deputy involved too, providing security for the operation. His name is Pritchard. I don't know what to do, Joe. If I report this, I could lose my job. But if I don't, I'm complicit in a federal crime." The final letter was dated August 8th. "I'm meeting with Ray and Cole tonight. They want to talk, try to convince me to keep quiet. I don't think I will. This is bigger than a job. This is wrong. If something happens, if I don't write again, you need to know where I was. Killdeer Ridge, east side near the old fire lookout. That's where the illegal cutting is happening. That's where the truth is." Lorna set the letters down. Her hands were shaking now. Dennis Vogel had known exactly what was happening. He'd known the players, the location, the crime. And then he disappeared. "He never wrote again," Joanne said quietly. "I waited for weeks. When I didn't hear from him, I called the boarding house. They said he'd left without warning. I filed a missing person report, but the sheriff—" "Pritchard," Lorna said. "Yes, he ran the investigation. He said Dennis had probably just moved on, that young men do that sometimes. He made me feel like I was overreacting." Joanne's voice hardened. "But I knew my brother. Dennis wouldn't leave without telling me. He wouldn't just disappear." "He didn't," Lorna said. "He was killed, and my brother found out about it." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it settling between them. Two families, two deaths, one terrible secret that had been buried for 26 years. "What do we do?" Joanne asked. Lorna thought about the photograph, about Cole Finnegan's confession, about Pritchard's warning. She thought about the note on her windshield and the way the town had closed ranks around a lie for more than 2 decades. "We find proof," she said. "Real proof. Something they can't deny or bury. And then we make them answer for it. How?" "Cole Finnegan told me there's more at the shed. He said there's a false floor, that Dennis's wallet and work orders are hidden there. If we can get those, we have evidence. We have enough to go to the state police, bypass Pritchard completely." Joanne stood. "Then let's go. It's a hard climb. The terrain, I don't care. Dennis was my brother. I've waited 26 years for this. I'm going." Lorna saw the determination in her eyes and recognized it. It was the same determination that had kept her alive on that mountain for 23 years. The same determination that wouldn't let her walk away from the truth now. "All right," Lorna said, "but we leave at dawn, and we bring everything we need to defend ourselves. If Pritchard finds out what we're doing, he won't stop us," Joanne said firmly. Not this time. They spent the rest of the day planning. Joanne provided maps, highlighted the route to Killdeer Ridge, marked the location of the shed based on Dennis's letters. Lorna explained the terrain, the best approach, the dangers. They packed supplies, checked equipment, prepared for the possibility that they might not make it back easily. As evening fell, Lorna called Joanne from the doorway. "Why did you send yourself that anonymous letter?" Joanne paused. "I didn't." "Then who did?" "I don't know. But someone wanted me to find that shed. Someone wanted the truth to come out." Lorna thought about that as she drove back toward Ridgeline. Someone had sent Joanne a letter. Someone had been watching Lorna on the mountain. Someone knew what was hidden in that shed and wanted it found. But who? And why now, after all these years? She didn't have answers yet. But tomorrow, when they opened that false floor and pulled out whatever Cole Finnegan had hidden there, maybe she would. The truck climbed back up the mountain as night fell. Lorna's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating trees and rock and the narrow road ahead. Somewhere behind her, Joanne Vogel was packing her own truck, preparing for a journey she'd been waiting decades to make, and somewhere in Ridgeline, Sheriff Pritchard was probably sleeping soundly, confident that the secrets he'd protected for so long would stay buried. He was wrong. Lorna didn't go straight to her cabin. Instead, she parked the truck on a logging spur, half a mile down the ridge, and walked the rest of the way through the trees. If someone was watching, she wanted to see them first. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no animals moving through the underbrush. Just the sound of her boots on the frozen ground and her own breathing. She approached her cabin from the east, staying in the shadows, rifle in hand. Everything looked normal. Door closed, windows dark, no tracks in the frost except her own from this morning. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was an instinct she'd learned to trust. The same instinct that had kept her alive through hard winters and close calls with predators. She circled the cabin once, checking the perimeter. Found nothing. Still, she waited another 10 minutes before approaching the door. When she finally went inside, she locked it behind her and moved through each room carefully, checking for signs that someone had been there. Nothing seemed disturbed. But when she went to her bedroom, she found it, a single item placed carefully on her pillow where she couldn't miss it. Her brother's old journal, the one she'd kept in a box in the attic, the one she hadn't looked at in 23 years. It was open to the last page. Lorna's blood went cold. She hadn't touched that journal since the day she moved into this cabin. She'd put it away deliberately, unable to bear reading Michael's words, his thoughts, his fears. And now someone had been in her home, had gone through her things, had left this message. She picked up the journal with trembling hands. Michael's handwriting, familiar and painful. The final entry was dated 3 days before he died. I'm going back to the shed tomorrow. I need proof of what happened to Dennis. I know they're watching me now. I know I should go to someone, but who? Pritchard is involved. The logging company has half the town on their payroll. If I'm wrong, I look like a fool. If I'm right, I'm in danger. But I can't let this go. Dennis Vogel deserves better than being forgotten. His family deserves the truth. Tomorrow I'll get what I need. Tomorrow I'll have proof. The entry ended there. No signature, no final thoughts. Just those words, hanging in the space between intention and death. Lorna sat on the edge of her bed, the journal in her lap. Someone had broken into her cabin. Someone had wanted her to see this. But why? To warn her? To threaten her? Or to show her that Michael had been close, so close before they stopped him? She read through the earlier entries, the ones from that summer. Michael had been methodical, careful. He'd documented everything, dates, names, locations. He'd written about joining the logging crew, about meeting Dennis Vogel, about the work they were doing up on the ridge. Then the tone shifted. Late July, early August, Michael started noticing things. The crew was cutting in unmarked areas. The maps didn't match the terrain. Ray Sutton, the foreman, got defensive when asked questions. There was money changing hands, cash payments, no paperwork. And then Dennis started asking questions too. Michael wrote about a conversation with Dennis, about how they'd compared notes and realized the operation was illegal. Dennis wanted to go to the authorities immediately. Michael had urged caution, wanted more evidence first. They'd agreed to document everything, take photos, collect work orders, but before they could gather enough proof, Dennis disappeared. Michael's entries after that were filled with anguish and guilt. He blamed himself for not acting faster. He wrote about searching for Dennis, about asking questions that made people nervous. He wrote about being followed, about strange cars parked near his house at night, about Pritchard pulling him over twice in 1 week for no reason. The final entries were darker. Michael knew he was in danger. He knew that what happened to Dennis could happen to him. But he couldn't walk away. The last line of the journal made that clear. If I don't come back, if something happens, someone needs to know the truth. The shed on Killdeer Ridge, that's where it all started. That's where the answers are. Lorna closed the journal. Her brother had tried to do the right thing, and it had gotten him killed. Now she was following the same path, asking the same questions, threatening the same people. History was trying to repeat itself, but this time she wasn't alone. She spent the night reading through the entire journal, front to back, absorbing every detail. Michael had been thorough. He'd named names: Ray Sutton, Cole Finnegan, a man named Jack Hendricks who ran the logging company, and Deputy Dale Pritchard who provided security and looked the other way. He'd documented dates, locations, even sketched rough maps of where the illegal cutting was happening. It was all there. Everything she needed to understand what had happened. Everything except proof that Dennis Vogel was dead and that Michael had been murdered. That proof was in the shed, under the false floor, waiting. Dawn came grey and cold. Lorna packed her gear, loaded her rifle, and headed down to meet Joanne. They'd agreed on a meeting spot, the junction where the logging road split, one path going toward Lorna's cabin, the other toward the old fire lookout. Joanne was already there when Lorna arrived, sitting in her truck with the engine running for heat. She looked tired but determined, dressed in layers, a day pack on the seat beside her. "You ready?" Lorna asked. "I've been ready for 26 years. They left Joanne's truck hidden behind a stand of fur and took Lorna's up the logging road as far as it would go. After that, they'd have to hike. The shed was 2 miles in, rough terrain, steep in places. It would take them an hour, maybe more at Joanne's pace. The forest was different with someone else in it. Lorna had grown used to solitude, to the sounds of her own footsteps and breathing. Now there were 2 sets of boots crunching through frost, 2 people moving through the trees. It made her hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the periphery. They walked in silence for the first half-mile. Then Joanne spoke. "Tell me about your brother." Lorna kept her eyes on the trail. "Not much to tell. He was younger than me by 2 years. Good kid. Little reckless sometimes, but good-hearted. He wanted to be a forest ranger, loved the outdoors. Sounds like Dennis. He wanted to be a teacher, history." Joanne's voice softened. "He used to send me books from whatever town he was working in. Said he was building my library, so when he came home, we'd have plenty to talk about." They walked in shared silence for a while. 2 women carrying the weight of brothers they'd lost. "I'm sorry I didn't know," Lorna said eventually. "About Dennis, about what happened. If I'd known, if Michael had told me, you were just as much a victim as we were," Joanne said. "They lied to both of us. They made us believe our brothers were irresponsible, that their deaths were their own fault. But we know better now." They reached a steep section where the trail switchbacked up a rocky slope. Lorna went first, testing each foothold, then helping Joanne up. The older woman was stronger than she looked, determined, but the altitude was getting to her. They stopped at the top to rest, both of them breathing hard. From here, they could see the valley below. Ridgeline was a cluster of buildings in the distance, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked peaceful, normal. Nothing like a place that harbored decades-old secrets and protected murderers. "We're close," Lorna said. Another quarter mile. They pressed on. The trees grew thicker here, old growth that had somehow escaped the logging crews. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Lorna led them off the main trail onto a game path, pushing through undergrowth until... there it was. The shed exactly as she'd left it. Sagging, rusted, half swallowed by moss, they approached cautiously. Lorna checked for tracks, for any sign that someone had been here since her last visit. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean they were alone. "Stay behind me," she said to Joanne. She pushed open the door. It creaked loudly, echoing in the small space. Inside, everything was as she remembered. Tools, workbenches, the tarp in the corner. "Help me move this," Lorna said, pointing to the workbench. Together, they shifted it aside. Underneath, the floorboards were visible. Lorna knelt, running her hands along the edges, looking for seams, for anything that suggested a hidden compartment. "There," Joanne said, pointing. One board was slightly shorter than the others, with small gaps on either side. Lorna pulled her knife, wedged it into the gap and pried. The board came up easily, revealing a space underneath, and inside that space, wrapped in plastic, was a second metal box. Lorna lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than the first one, about the size of a shoebox. The plastic was yellowed but intact, protecting whatever was inside from moisture and time. She set it on the workbench, cut away the plastic. The box itself was locked, but the lock was old, corroded. She broke it with the back of her knife. Inside were documents. Work orders from Cascade Timber Company, dated summer 1999, detailing cutting locations that matched the areas Michael had marked in his journal. Time cards showing the crew's hours, payment receipts, cash, no taxes withheld, and a leather wallet. Joanne took the wallet with shaking hands, opened it. Inside was Dennis Vogel's driver's license, the original, not expired, cash, credit cards, and a photograph of Joanne and Dennis together, taken years before, both of them smiling. "He had this with him," Joanne whispered. "He always carried it. He wouldn't have left it behind." "He didn't leave it," Lorna said. "Someone took it. Someone hid it here because they couldn't risk it being found with his body." Joanne looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. "Where is he?" "Where's my brother?" "I don't know. But with this evidence we can make them tell us." A voice behind them said, "I wouldn't count on that." They spun around. Ray Sutton stood in the doorway, a rifle in his hands, pointed at the ground, but ready. He looked older than in the photograph, weathered grey, with the hollow eyes of a man who hadn't slept well in years. "Ray," Lorna said carefully, "we're not looking for trouble. Too late for that. You found the box. You've got the evidence." He stepped inside, and Lorna saw the tremor in his hands, the way he kept glancing at the wallet in Joanne's hands. "I knew someone would find it eventually. I just hoped I'd be dead first." "You were the foreman," Joanne said, her voice shaking with anger. "You were there when my brother died." "I was there," Ray admitted. His voice was rough, broken. "God forgive me, I was there." The three of them stood in the shed, the air thick with tension and secrets that had been buried too long. Ray Sutton lowered his rifle slightly, but his finger stayed near the trigger. Lorna kept her own weapon ready, not pointing it at him, but prepared to if necessary. "Tell us what happened," Lorna said. Her voice was steady, but inside she was calculating distances, angles, how fast she could move if this went wrong. Ray's shoulders sagged. He looked like a man who'd been carrying a heavy weight for so long that letting it go felt like dying. It wasn't supposed to go the way it did. "You have to understand that." "I don't have to understand anything," Joanne said. Her voice was steel. "My brother is dead." "Tell me why." Ray nodded slowly. He moved to the workbench, set his rifle down, and leaned against it like his legs wouldn't hold him much longer. "We were cutting old growth on federal land. The company knew it, we knew it, but the money was too good to pass up. Your brother," he looked at Joanne, "Dennis figured it out. He was smart, paid attention. He started asking questions, comparing the maps we gave him to the actual terrain. By late July he knew, and you killed him for it." Joanne said, "No, not like that." "Not," Ray rubbed his face. "There was a confrontation. August 9th. Dennis said he was going to report us, that we were all going to federal prison. I tried to calm him down, explain that it wasn't that simple. Cole was there too. We were just talking, trying to reason with him." "What happened?" Lorna asked. "He got angry." Said we were criminals, that we didn't deserve to wear badges or run crews or any of it. Cole got defensive, got in his face. They shoved each other. And then, Ray's voice cracked. Dennis stepped back, tripped over a chain we'd left on the ground, fell, hit his head on the corner of a piece of equipment. Logging shears. The heavy kind. The shed was silent except for the wind outside. It was an accident, Ray continued. I swear to God it was an accident. But he was dead, and we panicked. We had a body, illegal operation, federal charges hanging over our heads. Pritchard was there. He was providing security, making sure nobody official came sniffing around. He said we had to bury it, all of it. So you buried my brother, Joanne said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We buried him that night. Near the North Ridge, about half a mile from here. We marked the spot, thought maybe someday. He shook his head. We built this shed to store his things. Couldn't risk them being found with the body. The plan was to come back in a few years, when things died down, and give him a proper burial. But we never did. Too scared. Too guilty. Lorna felt her jaw tighten. And my brother? Michael saw you, didn't he? Ray looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the answer before he spoke. He was camping nearby. We didn't know until the next day when we found his jacket near the site. We tracked him down, confronted him. He said he'd seen everything. Said he was going to the authorities. But you didn't kill him, Lorna said. That was Pritchard, Ray flinched. I wanted to let him go. Thought maybe we could pay him off, convince him to stay quiet. But Pritchard said we couldn't take that risk. Michael was already asking questions in town, talking to people. Pritchard said it had to look like an accident, just like with Dennis. How? The word came out sharp, cutting. Pritchard took care of it. November 15th. Told Michael he wanted to talk, clear things up. Met him by Coldwater Creek. I don't know exactly what happened. Pritchard never told me the details. But your brother ended up in the water, and Pritchard made sure the coroner's report said accidental drowning. Joanne had gone pale. You've lived with this for 26 years. 2 murders, 1 murder, Ray interrupted. Dennis was an accident. Michael, he closed his eyes. Michael was murder. And I've been living in hell ever since. I drink myself to sleep most nights. I see their faces. I hear Dennis hitting the ground. I think about Michael's family, about you, he gestured at Lorna, and what we took from you. Then why didn't you come forward? Lorna demanded. Why did you let us suffer? Because I'm a coward. Because Pritchard said if any of us talked, we'd all go down for murder. Because the logging company had money, influence, connections. They made sure we stayed quiet. Ray looked at the metal box on the workbench. But 3 weeks ago I couldn't take it anymore. I sent the letter to Joanne, anonymous, from a burner I bought 2 towns over. I thought if someone else found the evidence, if it came out without me having to say it. You thought you could stay hidden, Lorna finished. I thought maybe I could finally sleep at night. The wind picked up outside, rattling the walls of the shed. Lorna glanced at Joanne, saw the pain and anger warring in her expression. They had the truth now, or most of it. They had Ray's confession, the evidence in the box, the location of Dennis's body. It was more than either of them had hoped for, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Pritchard knows we're here, Lorna said. Doesn't he? Ray nodded. He knows you've been asking questions. Knows you went to Fairmont. He sent me up here to watch, to stop you if you got too close. So why are you telling us this instead of stopping us? Because I'm tired, Lorna. I'm 68 years old, and I'm tired of living like this. You want to take this evidence to the state police? Go ahead, I won't stop you. I'll even testify, tell them everything I know. He picked up his rifle but held it loosely, not threateningly. But you should know, Pritchard won't let this come out easy. He's got too much to lose. His career, his reputation, maybe his freedom. He'll come after you. Let him come, Lorna said. Ray looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your brother said something similar, right before Pritchard killed him. He said, do what you have to do, but the truth will come out eventually. It always does. Lorna's throat tightened. That sounded like Michael. Brave even when he was terrified. Where exactly is Dennis buried? Joanne asked. Her voice was steadier now, determined. Ray described the location, a clearing near the North Ridge, marked by 3 large boulders in a triangle formation. He'd put a cairn of rocks over the grave, small enough not to draw attention, but distinctive enough to find if you knew what to look for. "We need to go," Lorna said. She gathered the evidence, put it back in the metal box, and sealed it. "Ray, if you meant what you said about testifying, I did. Then come with us. We'll go straight to the state police. All three of us." Ray hesitated, then shook his head. "I can't, not yet. Pritchard's watching my house, my truck. If I leave with you, he'll know something's wrong. He'll run, or worse, he'll come after you before you can get to safety. Then what do you suggest?" "Give me 6 hours. I'll drive to the state police station in Collins Falls, turn myself in, tell them everything. That'll give you time to get down the mountain, get somewhere safe. Once my statement is on record, Pritchard can't make this disappear." Lorna didn't like it. Too many things could go wrong, but she also understood the logic. If they all left together, it would alert Pritchard immediately. This way they had a chance. 6 hours, she agreed. "If you don't show, we go without you." "I'll show." Ray looked at the metal box in her hands. "That evidence, guard it with your life. It's the only thing that proves any of this really happened." They left the shed together, Ray heading west toward his truck, Lorna and Joanne heading east back toward the logging road. Before they parted, Ray turned back. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry." Joanne didn't respond. She just turned and walked away, her back straight, her grief held tight inside. Lorna watched Ray disappear into the trees, then followed Joanne. They hiked in silence for the first mile. The weight of what they'd learned, what they'd heard, pressed down on both of them. 2 deaths, 26 years of lies, families destroyed by cowardice and greed. "Do you believe him?" Joanne asked finally. "About Dennis's death being an accident?" Lorna considered it. "I believe he believes it. Whether it's true, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. They covered it up. They murdered my brother to keep it hidden. That's enough. Will he really turn himself in? I think so. He's been carrying this guilt for too long. Sometimes the weight of a secret is worse than the punishment for revealing it." They reached Lorna's truck. She put the metal box in a backpack, secured it carefully. They had evidence now. They had a confession. They had a body location. Everything they needed to bring down Pritchard and expose the truth. But first, they had to get off this mountain alive. Lorna started the engine, began the slow drive down the logging road. She kept checking the rearview mirror, watching for vehicles behind them, for any sign they were being followed. The road was empty, but that didn't ease her tension. They were halfway down when she saw it, a truck blocking the road ahead, parked sideways across both lanes, a sheriff's cruiser behind it. And standing in front of both, arms crossed, was Sheriff Dale Pritchard. Lorna stopped 50 yards out. Her hand went to her rifle. "Stay in the truck," she told Joanne. "What are you going to do?" "Talk. See if we can get past him without this turning into something worse." But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't going to happen. Pritchard hadn't come up here to talk. He'd come to end this, the same way he'd ended it 26 years ago. She got out of the truck slowly, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. Pritchard didn't move, just watched her approach. When she was close enough to see his face clearly, she saw the cold calculation in his eyes. This was a man who'd killed before, and would do it again if necessary. "Lorna Bell," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "I was hoping we could avoid this." "Avoid what?" "You digging up things that should stay buried. Making trouble for people who don't deserve it. Putting yourself in danger. The only danger I'm in comes from you." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I gave you chances. I warned you, but you just couldn't let it go, could you? Just like your brother. My brother tried to do the right thing. Your brother was going to ruin lives. Good people, hard-working people who made one mistake. I couldn't let that happen, so you murdered him. I protected this town. I protected families, jobs, a whole economy that depended on that logging operation. Sometimes one life has to be sacrificed for the greater good." Lorna felt rage building in her chest, hot and tight. "You're a coward. And you're done." Pritchard's expression hardened. "No, Lorna, you're done. You and that woman in your truck. This ends here today. Another tragic accident on a dangerous mountain. No one will question it. No one will care. He reached for his sidearm, and Lorna raised her rifle. Time seemed to slow. Lorna's finger found the trigger. Pritchard's hand closed around his pistol grip. 50 yards separated them, close enough that neither would miss if they fired. "Don't," Lorna said. Her voice was steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Don't make this worse than it already is." "Worse?" Pritchard laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the trees. "Lorna, you have no idea how much worse this can get. You think you've figured it all out, don't you? Found some evidence, got Ray Sutton to talk. Think you're going to play hero and bring down the corrupt? Sheriff, that's exactly what I'm going to do, except you're missing one very important piece of the story." He drew his pistol fully now, held it at his side. "Ray Sutton didn't tell you everything. He couldn't, because he doesn't know everything." Behind her, Lorna heard the truck door open. Joanne getting out despite her warning. She wanted to tell her to stay back, but she couldn't take her eyes off Pritchard. "What are you talking about?" Joanne called out. Pritchard's smile widened. "The girl in the photograph. The one standing off to the side. The one nobody's mentioned yet. You know who she was?" Lorna's mind flashed back to the image. The dark-haired girl, young, pretty, standing apart from the others. Her name was Amy Henley, Pritchard continued. 20 years old, working the cruise camp as a cook that summer. She was there the night Dennis Vogel died. She saw everything. "So what happened to her?" Joanne demanded. "That's the interesting part." Pritchard took a step forward. "See, Ray told you Dennis's death was an accident, and that much is true. What he didn't tell you is that Amy tried to run, tried to get help. Cole Finnegan caught her, dragged her back. They argued about what to do with her. Some wanted to let her go, figured she wouldn't talk. Others thought she was too much of a risk." Lorna's stomach turned. "Who made the decision?" "I did." No remorse in his voice, no hesitation. "I was the one with the badge, the authority, the ability to make problems disappear. So I made Amy Henley disappear too." The words hung in the air like poison. "You killed her," Lorna said. "I did what had to be done. Just like with Dennis, just like with your brother, just like I'm about to do with you." He raised his pistol. "The difference is, this time there won't be any evidence left behind. No shed, no metal box, no witnesses. Just 2 more unfortunate souls who got lost on the mountain and never made it down. Ray's already on his way to the state police," Lorna said. "You can kill us, but it won't stop the truth from coming out." Pritchard's smile faltered. "Ray won't make it to Collins Falls. I've got men watching him. The minute he tries to leave his property, they'll stop him. Permanently, if necessary. Then you've already lost. You can't kill everyone who knows." "Can't I?" Ray Sutton, guilt-ridden alcoholic, finally snaps and kills himself. Cole Finnegan, afraid of being implicated, has a heart attack. The stress, you understand. And you two, well, tragic hiking accident. Bodies recovered in a few weeks. If the animals don't get to them first." He steadied his aim. "It's worked for 26 years. It'll work again." Lorna knew she had seconds to act. She could shoot first, might even hit him. But then what? He'd called in backup, had men positioned somewhere. Even if she took him down, they wouldn't make it off the mountain. Unless Cole Finnegan talked to us yesterday, Lorna said quickly. "At the diner in Ridgeline, 12 people saw us together. He told us everything, and I recorded it. It was a lie, but a good one." Pritchard's expression flickered with uncertainty. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Check my phone. It's in my jacket pocket. You can listen to the whole conversation." Pritchard hesitated. That hesitation was all Lorna needed. She took a step to the side, angling so Joanne was no longer in his direct line of fire. "Or you could kill us right here, right now, and deal with that recording showing up after we're dead. Wonder what the state police would think about a sheriff executing 2 women on a logging road, especially when one of them has evidence of multiple murders hidden on her person." "Give me the evidence," Pritchard demanded. "The metal box, the documents, everything. Give it to me and I'll let you walk away. You'll let us walk away so you can shoot us in the back. No thanks. Then we're at an impasse." His finger moved toward the trigger, which means a gunshot cracked through the forest, but it didn't come from Pritchard. It didn't come from Lorna either. It came from behind Pritchard's truck. He spun, confused, looking for the source. A figure stepped out from the trees, a man older, wearing a sheriff's department jacket. but not from Ridgeline. The patch on his shoulder read, "State Police." "Sheriff Pritchard," the man called out, "I'm going to need you to lower your weapon now." More figures emerged from the forest. 4, 5, 6 armed officers, all in state police uniforms, all with weapons drawn. They moved in formation, surrounding Pritchard's position. Pritchard looked around wildly. "What is this? You have no jurisdiction here." "We do when we're investigating federal crimes on federal land." The lead officer stepped forward. He was in his 50s, grey-haired, with the bearing of someone who'd been doing this work for decades. "It's Special Agent Morris, FBI. We've been listening to this entire conversation, Sheriff. And I have to say, it's not often someone confesses to 3 murders in under 5 minutes. Pritchard's face went white. "You can't. That's not. You have the right to remain silent," Morris continued. "And I strongly suggest you use it." 2 officers moved in, disarmed Pritchard and cuffed him. He didn't resist, just stood there in shock as they read him his rights. Lorna lowered her rifle, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Agent Morris walked over to her. "Miss Bell, Miss Vogel, are you both all right? How did you—" Lorna started. "Ray Sutton called us this morning, confessed to everything, told us about the shed, the evidence, and that you 2 were planning to retrieve it. He also warned us that Sheriff Pritchard would try to stop you." Morris gestured to the forest. "We've had this area under surveillance for the past 3 hours. When Pritchard showed up and blocked the road, we knew we had him." Joanne stepped forward. "My brother's body. Ray said it was buried near the North Ridge. We'll have a team up there within the hour. If he's there, we'll bring him home." Morris's expression softened. "I'm sorry for what you've both been through. But thanks to your persistence and Ray Sutton's conscience, we're going to get justice for everyone involved." Lorna watched as they loaded Pritchard into a state police vehicle. He looked smaller now, diminished, no longer the imposing figure who'd terrorized this town for decades. Just an old man who'd let fear and ambition turn him into a killer. "What about Cole Finnegan?" Lorna asked. "He was involved too." "We have officers at his hardware store now. He'll be brought in for questioning. Based on Ray's statement and the evidence you recovered, we'll be able to determine his level of culpability." Morris paused. "Ray Sutton is cooperating fully. He's in protective custody, giving a complete statement. He also told us about a 4th person, Amy Henley." Lorna nodded. "Pritchard just confessed to killing her too. We heard. That recording equipment picked up everything." Morris pointed to a small device attached to his vest. "The confession is admissible. Between that, the physical evidence, and Ray's testimony, we have enough to prosecute everyone involved." "Will you be able to find her?" Joanne asked quietly. "Amy Henley? We'll try. Pritchard said he made her disappear. That could mean a lot of things, but if there's a grave, we'll locate it. This entire area is now a crime scene. We're bringing in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic teams. If there are bodies on this mountain, we'll find them." The sun was higher now, burning off the morning fog. Lorna looked at the mountains around her, at the forest that had been her refuge for so long. It had also been a graveyard, hiding secrets, and bodies, and the truth that people like Pritchard had tried so hard to bury. But not anymore. "What happens now?" Lorna asked. "Now you both give statements, then we process the evidence, conduct the investigation, build the case. It'll take time, months probably. There will be trials, testimony, media attention. It won't be easy." Morris met her eyes. "But it will be worth it. You've given these people justice, Miss Bell, your brother, Dennis Vogel, Amy Henley, all of them." Lorna thought about Michael's last journal entry. Someone needs to know the truth. Now someone did. Now everyone would. They spent the next several hours at a mobile command post the FBI had set up near the base of the mountain. Lorna and Joanne gave detailed statements, turned over the metal box and its contents, walked the agents through everything they'd discovered. The photograph, the journal, the letters, all of it became evidence now, tagged and documented and logged into a system that would ensure it couldn't be hidden again. Cole Finnegan was brought in around noon. He looked defeated, resigned like he'd known this day was coming for 26 years. He confirmed Ray's account, added details about the logging operation and how the company had pressured them to keep cutting even after Dennis started asking questions. He admitted to being present when Dennis died, to helping bury the body, to staying silent when Michael Bell was killed. But he maintained he hadn't known Pritchard was planning to murder Michael until after it was done. "I should have stopped it," Cole said during his statement, his voice breaking. "I should have gone to someone, anyone, but I was scared. Scared of prison, scared of losing everything. So I kept quiet, and a good kid died because of it." By late afternoon, the forensic teams had located Dennis Vogel's grave. They worked carefully, respectfully, documenting everything before beginning the excavation. Agent Morris personally informed Joanne when they confirmed the identity through dental records and personal effects. "We'll release his remains to you once the medical examiner completes the necessary examinations," Morris said gently. "You'll be able to give your brother the burial he deserves." Joanne nodded, tears streaming down her face, but there was relief there too. After 26 years of not knowing, of wondering and hoping and grieving without closure, she finally had an answer. Her brother could come home. They found Amy Henley 3 days later, buried in a shallow grave a quarter-mile from Dennis's location. She'd been 20 years old. Her family, who had filed a missing person report in 1999 that was never properly investigated, was contacted. Another family getting closure, another victim getting justice. The logging company, now under different ownership, cooperated with the investigation. Records were subpoenaed, revealing a pattern of illegal cutting that extended far beyond that summer. The company had been systematically harvesting old-growth timber from protected federal land for years, paying off local officials and hiring security to keep people quiet. The current owners claimed ignorance, but the FBI wasn't buying it. Federal charges were filed. Pritchard was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other crimes. He pleaded not guilty, hired expensive lawyers, and tried to claim he was being framed. But the evidence was overwhelming. His own recorded confession, Ray Sutton's testimony, the physical evidence, the pattern of behavior spanning decades. His trial was scheduled for the following spring. Ray Sutton took a plea deal, 2nd degree, murder for Michael Bell, conspiracy and accessory charges for Dennis Vogel and Amy Henley. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony against Pritchard and the logging company, he received a reduced sentence, 20 years with possibility of parole. It wasn't enough, Lorna thought, but it was something, and Ray seemed almost relieved when the sentence came down, like the weight of guilt had been heavier than any prison term could be. Cole Finnegan was charged with accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. He cooperated fully, testified against Pritchard, and received a suspended sentence with probation. The judge noted his remorse and his decision to finally tell the truth, but made it clear that his silence had enabled decades of injustice. Throughout it all, Lorna stayed in contact with Joanne. They'd formed a bond through shared tragedy, and now through shared justice. They attended hearings together, supported each other through the difficult testimony, reminded each other why. This mattered when the process seemed endless and exhausting. And slowly, the town of Ridgeline began to change. The truth came out, spreading through coffee shops and diners and church halls. Some people were angry, defensive, protective of the reputation they'd built. But others, especially younger generations who hadn't been part of the original conspiracy, demanded accountability. The mayor, whose family had owned the logging company, resigned. A special election was held. New leadership promised transparency and a commitment to reckoning with the past. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast. But it was progress. Winter came to Killdeer Ridge earlier than usual that year. By mid-November, snow blanketed the upper elevations, and Lorna found herself settling into familiar rhythms, splitting wood, checking her stores, preparing for the long months of isolation. Except she wasn't isolated anymore. Not really. Joanne called twice a week now just to check in, to share updates about the case, to talk about ordinary things that had nothing to do with death or justice or the past. It was strange at first, having someone who cared whether she was safe, whether she had enough supplies, whether she needed anything. But it was also comforting in a way Lorna hadn't expected. The trial was set for March. Agent Morris had been clear about what that would entail. Weeks of testimony, cross-examination, media attention, and the painful process of reliving everything in front of a courtroom full of strangers. Lorna had agreed without hesitation. She'd come this far. She wouldn't stop now, but there were complications. Pritchard's lawyers were good, expensive, and they'd found technicalities to exploit. They challenged the admissibility of the recorded confession, arguing entrapment. They questioned the chain of custody for the evidence recovered from the shed. They painted Pritchard as a dedicated public servant who'd been investigating corruption, not participating in it. It was all nonsense, but it was effective nonsense. The prosecutor warned Lorna that the trial could go either way, that juries were unpredictable, that money and influence still mattered even when the truth was clear. We need to be prepared for anything. The prosecutor, a woman named Sandra Chen, told her during a prep session in January. Pritchard's team is going to attack your credibility. They'll bring up your isolation, your estrangement from the community, the fact that you've been living alone for 23 years. They'll try to paint you as unstable, obsessed, someone with an axe to grind. I am someone with an axe to grind, Lorna said. They killed my brother. I know. And that's what makes you credible. But you need to be ready for them to twist it, to make your pain look like paranoia. Chen leaned forward. Can you handle that? Can you sit in that courtroom while they tear apart your brother's memory and accuse you of making all this up? Lorna thought about Michael's journal, about the photograph, about 23 years of grief she'd carried alone. Yes, I can handle it. Good, because we're going to need you strong. Ray Sutton's testimony will be crucial, but he's a confessed accomplice. Cole Finnegan's credibility is compromised. You and Joanne are the ones who brought this to light. The jury needs to believe you. The weeks leading up to the trial were tense. Lorna continued her preparations, not just for the legal battle, but for the personal one. She went through Michael's journal again, memorizing every detail. She studied the photograph until she could describe every shadow, every expression. She reviewed her own timeline of events, making sure her memory was clear and consistent. Joanne drove up to visit twice, bringing supplies and company. They'd sit in Lorna's cabin, drinking coffee and talking strategy, or sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. The friendship they'd built was unexpected but real, forged in shared purpose and mutual understanding. Are you scared? Joanne asked during one visit, watching snow fall through the window. Of the trial? No, of losing. Yes. Lorna poured more coffee. If Pritchard walks, if the jury doesn't believe us, they'll believe us. They have to. The evidence is there. Evidence can be explained away. Juries can be swayed, and Pritchard has powerful friends. Lorna set down her cup. But even if he walks, we've done something important. We've told the truth. We've given Dennis and Michael and Amy a voice. That matters. It does, Joanne agreed, but I want him to pay. I want him to spend the rest of his life in prison, thinking about what he did. So do I. February brought more snow and more preparation. The prosecutor's office arranged multiple practice sessions, mock cross-examinations, designed to prepare Lorna for the hostility she'd face on the stand. Jen brought in assistants to play defense attorneys, to ask the hard questions, to challenge every statement. Why did you wait 23 years to investigate your brother's death? How convenient that you just happened to find this shed after all this time. Isn't it true you've been estranged from the community, that people in Ridgeline consider you unstable? Could this entire story be a fabrication, a way to get revenge on a town that you believe wronged you? Lorna answered each question calmly, methodically, sticking to the facts. She didn't get defensive. She didn't let emotion override clarity. She told the truth and trusted that the truth would be enough. But at night, alone in her cabin, she sometimes wondered. The forensic evidence was solid. DNA from the burial sites matched Dennis Vogel and Amy Henley. The work orders proved illegal logging. The journal documented Michael's investigation. Ray Sutton's testimony corroborated everything. The recorded confession was damning, but Pritchard's lawyers were already spinning alternative narratives. Ray was lying to get a reduced sentence. The confession was coerced. The evidence had been planted. It was all circumstantial, they said, built on the testimony of criminals and the obsession of a grief-stricken woman who'd been living in isolation for decades. They're going to make this about you, Chen warned during their final prep session a week before the trial. About your mental state, your reliability as a witness. You need to stay calm, stay focused, and don't let them rattle you. I won't. They'll bring up your lifestyle. 23 years alone on a mountain. No friends, no family, minimal contact with society. They'll suggest you're paranoid, that you've built this entire conspiracy in your head because you couldn't accept your brother's death. Let them try. I have evidence. I have facts. And I have Joanne backing up everything I say. They'll attack her credibility too. Say she's equally desperate for answers, willing to believe anything. Lorna met Chen's eyes. Then we make sure the jury hears from Ray Sutton and Cole Finnegan. We make sure they understand this isn't about two grieving women making up stories. This is about systematic corruption and murder spanning decades. Chen nodded slowly. You're ready. I've been ready for 23 years. The night before the trial, Lorna couldn't sleep. She stood on her porch, looking out over the ridge, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The shed hidden in the forest, the photograph in the metal box, Ray Sutton's confession, Pritchard's threats, the long, painful process of bringing the truth to light. Tomorrow it would all come to a head. Tomorrow she'd sit in a courtroom and face the man who'd killed her brother. Tomorrow justice would finally have its day. She thought about Michael, about how young he'd been, how brave. He'd tried to do the right thing, and it had cost him everything. Now she was finishing what he started. She was making sure his death meant something, that the truth he'd died protecting finally came out. The wind picked up, rattling through the pine trees, carrying the smell of snow. Lorna closed her eyes, let the cold air fill her lungs. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. I'm doing this for you, Michael, she whispered into the darkness. For you and Dennis and Amy and everyone else who suffered because these people thought they could hide the truth forever. Inside, she packed a bag for the trip to the courthouse, 3 hours south, in the county seat where the trial would be held. She'd be staying in a motel for the duration, away from her cabin, away from her mountain. It would be the longest she'd spent away from Killdeer Ridge in decades, but it would be worth it. At dawn, Joanne arrived to drive with her. They'd face this together, the way they'd faced everything since that day in the shed. Two women who'd lost brothers, who'd been lied to and dismissed and told to let the past go. Two women who'd refused to give up, who'd pushed through fear and danger and uncertainty to find the truth. Ready? Joanne asked as Lorna locked her cabin door. Lorna took one last look at her home, at the mountains that had sheltered her for so long. Ready. They drove south through snow-covered valleys and small towns still waking up. The radio played softly, news reports, weather forecasts. Nothing about the trial yet, but that would change soon. By tomorrow, the media would be covering it. By next week, it would be national news. The story was too big, too sensational to stay local, corrupt sheriff. Decades of cover-up. Multiple murders. A woman who'd lived in isolation for 23 years, finally getting justice for her brother. It was the kind of story that would be talked about for years. But for Lorna, it wasn't a story. It was her life. It was Michael's life. It was the truth that had been buried and was finally being brought into the light. They reached the courthouse by mid-morning. Media trucks were already there, cameras set up, reporters waiting. Agent Morris met them at the entrance, guided them through a side door away from the cameras. Big day, he said. The biggest, Lorna agreed. Inside, the courthouse was bustling with activity. Lawyers in suits, clerks carrying files, security. checking IDs. Zandra Chen found them quickly, pulled them into a conference room for a final briefing. "Opening statements are this afternoon," she said. "The defense is going to paint Pritchard as a hero, a public servant who devoted his life to protecting this community. They'll claim this is a witch hunt, that we're prosecuting an innocent man based on the false testimony of convicted criminals." "What do we say?" Joanne asked. "We let the evidence speak. We tell the story chronologically, methodically, building a case brick by brick. By the time we're done, the jury will see exactly what happened and exactly who's responsible." Chen looked at Lorna. "You'll testify in the second week. Until then, you'll need to be in the courtroom every day, visible, credible, showing the jury that you're a real person seeking real justice." "I'll be there," Lorna said. At 1 o'clock, they entered the courtroom. It was packed. Journalists, sketch artists, members of the public who'd been following the case. Lorna and Joanne took seats in the front row, behind the prosecutor's table, and then the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hammond." The trial of Sheriff Dale Pritchard had begun. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Hammond took her seat. She was in her early 60s, with steel-grey hair and sharp eyes that suggested she'd seen every trick lawyers could pull, and wasn't impressed by any of them. She surveyed the room, let the silence stretch, then nodded to the prosecutor. "Miss Chen, opening statement." Zandra Chen stood, buttoned her jacket and walked to the jury box. 12 faces looked back at her. 6 men, 6 women ranging from their 20s to their 70s. A cross-section of the county, people who would decide whether justice finally came or whether Pritchard walked free. "Members of the jury," Chen began, her voice clear and steady. "Over the next several weeks, you're going to hear a story that's hard to believe. A story about corruption, greed, and murder. About powerful people who thought they could hide the truth forever. About 3 young people whose lives were stolen from them. And about 2 families who refused to stop searching for answers." She walked slowly in front of the jury, making eye contact with each person. In the summer of 1999, a young man named Dennis Vogel came to Ridgeline to work on a logging crew. He was 22 years old. He was saving money for school. He wrote letters to his sister every week. He was a good kid who made the mistake of noticing something wrong, that the crew he worked for was cutting timber illegally on protected federal land. Chen paused. "Let that sink in. When Dennis threatened to report this crime, he was killed. Not in anger, not in the heat of passion, but deliberately. And then his body was buried in an unmarked grave. And his death was covered up by the very people sworn to protect this community." She gestured to the defense table where Pritchard sat in a suit, looking calm and confident. Too confident, Lorna thought. The defendant, Sheriff Dale Pritchard, was part of that cover-up from the beginning. He helped bury the evidence. He intimidated witnesses. And when another young man, Michael Bell, discovered what had happened to Dennis Vogel, Sheriff Pritchard murdered him too. Made it look like an accident. Made it look like another tragedy that no one needed to investigate too closely. The jury was listening intently now. Jen had them. For 26 years, Sheriff Pritchard lived with this secret. He built a career on it, rose through the ranks, became the most powerful law enforcement officer in this county, and he thought he was safe. He thought the truth was buried so deep it would never surface. Chen turned to look at Lorna and Joanne, but he didn't count on 2 women who loved their brothers enough to keep asking questions, who refused to accept the lies they'd been told, who dug up the evidence, literally, and brought it to light. The evidence you're going to see, documents, photographs, recordings, testimony, will prove beyond any doubt that Sheriff Dale Pritchard is responsible for 3 murders and decades of corruption. She returned to the jury box. This is not a complicated case. The facts are clear. The evidence is overwhelming. And by the end of this trial, you will have no doubt that justice demands a guilty verdict. Chen sat down. The defense attorney, a slick man in his 50s named Gerald Winters, stood immediately. He had the look of someone who billed $500 an hour and considered it a bargain. "Members of the jury," Winters began, his voice smooth as oil. "Miss Chen just told you a compelling story. But that's all it is, a story. a narrative constructed from the testimony of convicted criminals, the obsessions of grieving women, and evidence that has been misinterpreted and manipulated to fit a predetermined conclusion. He walked to stand beside Pritchard. He put a hand on his shoulder. Sheriff Dale Pritchard has served this community for 40 years. He solved crimes, kept people safe, dedicated his life to public service. And now, in the twilight of his career, he's being accused of heinous acts based on what? The word of Ray Sutton, a man who's admitted to being involved in illegal activity and who cut a deal to save his own skin. The word of Cole Finnegan, another confessed criminal. And the assumptions of two women who, understandably, are desperate for answers about their brothers' deaths. Winters paced in front of the jury, his movements calculated for maximum effect. Here's what really happened. Yes, there was illegal logging in 1999. Yes, Dennis Vogel and Michael Bell discovered it. But Sheriff Pritchard wasn't part of the conspiracy. He was investigating it. He was working to build a case against the real criminals. And tragically, both young men died before he could complete that investigation. Dennis Vogel's death was an accident, as Ray Sutton himself admitted. Michael Bell's death was a drowning, thoroughly investigated at the time. He paused, let his voice drop. What you're seeing here is a rush to judgment, a need to blame someone, anyone, for tragedies that were just that, tragedies, not murders. Not conspiracies, just sad, unfortunate events that Ms. Bell and Ms. Vogel have spent decades being unable to accept. Lorna felt her jaw tighten. She wanted to stand up, to shout that he was lying, that everything he said was calculated misdirection. But she stayed still, stayed calm, just as Chen had coached her. "We will show you," Winters continued, "that the evidence is circumstantial at best. That the recordings were obtained under questionable circumstances, that the witnesses have every reason to lie, and that Sheriff Pritchard is innocent of these charges." He returned to his seat. Judge Hammond looked at the clock. "We'll break for lunch. Prosecution can call its first witness at 2 o'clock. The courtroom emptied slowly. Lorna and Joanne followed Chen to the conference room. "He's good," Joanne said quietly. "He is," Chen agreed. "But being good at talking doesn't change the facts. Don't worry, we've got this." After lunch, the prosecution began building its case. The first witness was a federal land surveyor who testified about the protected status of the areas where the illegal logging occurred. Maps were shown, boundaries explained. It was dry, technical testimony, but necessary to establish the underlying crime. The second witness was a former employee of the logging company who testified about the cash payments, the off-the-books operations, the instructions to cut in areas that weren't on the official maps. He was credible, specific, and the defense couldn't shake him on cross-examination. Day 2 brought more technical witnesses. The forensic anthropologist who'd examined Dennis Vogel's remains. The medical examiner who testified about cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with falling and striking a hard edge. The FBI agent who documented the burial site and recovered the evidence. It was methodical, building piece by piece. But Lorna could see the jury getting restless, waiting for the dramatic testimony. The smoking gun that came on day 3 when Ray Sutton took the stand. He looked older than his 68 years, grey and thin, like guilt had been eating him from the inside. He was sworn in, identified himself, and began his testimony under Chen's questioning. "Mr. Sutton, what was your relationship with the defendant in the summer of 1999? "He was providing security for the logging operation, making sure no one official came around asking questions. Was he aware the operation was illegal?" "Yes, ma'am. He knew from the start. We paid him cash, $2,000 a month, to keep the authorities away." The defense objected, but Judge Hammond overruled. The testimony continued for hours. Ray described the night Dennis died, the argument, the fall. He described burying the body, building the shed, hiding the evidence. And then he described what happened to Michael Bell. Pritchard said the kid was a problem, said he'd seen too much, knew too much, said we had to take care of it before he talked to the wrong people. And by take care of it, what did he mean? Ray's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Kill him!" The courtroom was absolutely silent. Did Sheriff Pritchard kill Michael Bell? Yes, he called Michael, said he wanted to meet, talk things over. Michael trusted him, thought a lawman would protect him. But Pritchard took him to Coldwater Creek and Ray's voice broke. He drowned him, made it look like an accident. Came back and told us it was done, that we were safe. Chen let the silence stretch. And you said nothing. For 26 years, I said nothing. God forgive me, I said nothing. Winters tore into Ray on cross-examination, painting him as a liar, a murderer, someone who'd say anything to reduce his own sentence. But Ray held steady. He admitted his guilt. He acknowledged his cowardice. But he never wavered on the core facts. Pritchard had orchestrated everything. The jury watched it all, their faces impossible to read. Day 4 brought Cole Finnegan to the stand. He corroborated Ray's testimony, adding details about the logging company's operations and Pritchard's role. He was nervous, apologetic, but consistent. The defense tried to discredit him, but like Ray, he never changed his core story. Then came day 5. Lorna's day. She dressed carefully that morning, simple, professional, nothing that would distract from her testimony. Joanne helped her with her hair, squeezed her hand before they left the motel. "Just tell the truth," Joanne said. "That's all you have to do." In the courtroom, Chen called her name. Lorna stood, walked to the witness stand, and was sworn in. She looked at the jury, 12 strangers who held justice in their hands, and then at Pritchard. He stared back at her, his expression cold, calculating, trying to intimidate her one last time. It didn't work, Chen began gently. Establishing Lorna's background, her relationship with Michael, the events of 1999. Lorna spoke clearly, calmly, answering each question without embellishment. She described Michael's behavior that summer, how he'd changed, grown secretive and scared. She described his death, the inadequate investigation, the town's rush to call it an accident. "Did you believe it was an accident?" Chen asked. "Not in my heart, but I didn't have proof. And no one wanted to listen to me. What changed? I found the shed. I found the photograph with Michael in it, with Dennis Vogel, and I realized my brother had been investigating something that got him killed." Chen introduced the photograph as evidence, had Lorna identify the people in it. Then came the journal, the letters from Dennis, the metal box with its contents. Each piece of evidence was explained, contextualized, woven into the narrative of what had really happened 26 years ago. The prosecution's questioning took 2 hours. When Chen sat down, Gerald Winters stood. His smile was predatory. "Miss Bell, you've lived alone on Killdeer Ridge for 23 years, is that correct?" "Yes. No family, no friends, minimal contact with society. I had contact when I needed it. I went to town for supplies, twice a year, for a few hours at a time." Winters walked closer. "Isn't it fair to say you isolated yourself? Cut yourself off from human connection? I chose a different way of life, a way of life that some might consider extreme. Unhealthy even," Chen objected. Judge Hammond sustained it. Winters smiled and moved on. "During these 23 years of isolation, did you often think about your brother's death?" "Yes. Did you blame the town for not believing you?" "I blamed the people who killed him, but for most of those years, you didn't know anyone had killed him. You just couldn't accept that his death was an accident, because it wasn't an accident, but you didn't know that. You just couldn't let it go." Winter's voice was sharp now. "Isn't it true, Ms. Bell, that you've spent decades obsessing over your brother's death, unable to move forward, and that finding this shed gave you an opportunity to construct a narrative that finally made sense of your grief?" Lorna met his eyes. "I didn't construct anything. I found evidence, real physical evidence that proves my brother was murdered. Evidence that you interpreted in a way that confirmed what you already believed. Evidence that tells the truth. Winters changed tactics. This photograph you found, it shows your brother with Dennis Vogel and 2 other men, but it doesn't show a crime. It doesn't show Sheriff Pritchard. It's just a picture of people standing together. It connects them. It proves they knew each other, proves they were in the same place at the same time. Nothing more." He picked up Michael's journal. "And this journal, your brother's private thoughts written for himself. Vague references to the shed and "they're watching me." Not exactly hard evidence of murder, is it? "Read the last entry," Lorna said firmly. "He says he's going back to the shed to get proof. 3 days later, he's dead. That's not coincidence. Or perhaps it is. Perhaps your brother, troubled and drinking as the official report states, went to the creek that night and tragically drowned. And you, unable to accept that, have created an elaborate conspiracy to explain it." Sheriff Pritchard confessed, Lorna said, her voice rising slightly. "The FBI recorded him admitting to 3 murders. A confession, allegedly coerced during a tense confrontation in which you were armed, and Sheriff Pritchard felt threatened. He was threatening us. He was trying to kill us to cover up what he'd done. Or he was trying to de-escalate a dangerous situation with an armed woman who'd been living in isolation for decades." Winters turned to the jury. "Ms. Bell wants someone to blame for her brother's death. That's understandable. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true." The cross-examination continued for another hour. Winters attacked every aspect of her testimony, her credibility, her mental state. But Lorna held firm. She didn't get angry. She didn't break down. She just kept telling the truth over and over, calmly and clearly. When it was finally over, when she stepped down from the stand, she felt exhausted but also relieved. She'd said what needed to be said. The jury had heard her. Now it was in their hands. Joanne testified next, describing her search for Dennis, the anonymous letter, the discovery of his remains. She was emotional but clear, and the defense couldn't shake her core. Testimony. The prosecution rested its case on day 6. The defense began with character witnesses, people from Ridgeline, who testified about Pritchard's years of service, his dedication, his reputation. It was effective in a way, humanizing him, making him seem like a real person rather than a monster. But Chen was ready. On cross-examination, she got several witnesses to admit they knew about the logging operation, that it was an open secret in town, that people looked the other way because the money was good and jobs were scarce. The defense called Pritchard to the stand on day 8. He denied everything, said he'd been investigating the illegal logging, not participating in it. Said Dennis Vogel's death was an accident he had no part in. Said Michael Bell drowned, and any suggestion otherwise was fantasy. "I tried to protect this community," Pritchard said, his voice full of righteous indignation. "And now I'm being persecuted for it by people with axes to grind and lawyers with political ambitions." But Chen destroyed him on cross. She played the recording of his confrontation with Lorna and Joanne. Played it for the entire courtroom, his voice clear and damning. "I did what had to be done. Just like with Dennis, just like with your brother." She walked him through every lie, every inconsistency, every moment where his story didn't match the physical evidence. By the end, he looked smaller, diminished, his confidence shattered. The trial lasted 12 days total. Closing arguments came on day 13. Chen spoke first, tying together all the evidence, all the testimony, painting a picture of systematic corruption and murder. The defendant thought he could hide the truth forever. But truth has a way of surfacing. Justice has a way of finding the light. And today you have the power to deliver that justice. Winters countered with emotion and doubt. Don't let sympathy override reason. Don't convict a good man based on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of admitted criminals. If you have reasonable doubt, and you must acquit. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 48 hours of waiting, of pacing, of wondering. Lorna and Joanne stayed close, supporting each other, trying not to let fear overwhelm them. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly. Lorna's hands were shaking as she took her seat. Joanne gripped her arm tightly. The jury filed in, their faces solemn. The foreman stood. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Michael Bell, how do you find? Guilty. Lorna's breath caught. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Amy Henley, how do you find? Guilty. Tears streamed down her face now. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Dennis Vogel, how do you find? Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hammond called for order, but the sound of relief and vindication couldn't be contained. Lorna turned to Joanne, and they embraced, crying, holding each other up. Justice. Finally, after 26 years, justice. Pritchard sat motionless at the defense table, his face ashen. The bailiff moved to take him into custody. As they led him away, he looked at Lorna one last time. She looked back unafraid. She'd won. The truth had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. But Chen guided Lorna and Joanne through a side exit, away from the cameras. In a quiet room, Agent Morris waited. "You did it," he said simply. "You got him." "We got him," Lorna corrected. "All of us together." That night, back at the motel, Lorna sat alone and thought about Michael. About how he'd tried to do the right thing. About how his courage, even in death, had led to this moment. "It's over, Michael," she whispered. "It's finally over. You can rest now." And for the first time in 23 years, she felt like maybe she could rest too. Spring came to Killdeer Ridge with a softness Lorna hadn't noticed in years. Maybe it had always been this gentle, and she'd just been too wrapped up in survival to see it. Or maybe something fundamental had shifted, both in the world and inside herself, making room for beauty where there had only been necessity. The sentencing hearing was held in late April. Judge Hammond gave Pritchard 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. He would die in prison, his reputation destroyed, his legacy nothing but a cautionary tale about corruption and the long reach of justice. Lorna attended the hearing with Joanne. They sat together in the front row, just as they had throughout the trial, and watched as Pritchard was led away in chains. He didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge their presence. He'd become smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his crimes finally being recognized. After the hearing, there was a small gathering at a community center in Ridgeline. The town had organized it, a memorial service for Dennis Vogel, Michael Bell, and Amy Henley. People came who'd known them, who remembered them before they became victims. Before they became case files and evidence, Amy Henley's parents were there. Elderly now, grateful to finally have closure about their daughter's fate. They'd buried her 2 weeks earlier, in a cemetery near her childhood home. With full knowledge of what had happened to her and who was responsible, Dennis Vogel's funeral had been in March. Joanne had laid him to rest beside their parents, with a headstone that read, "Dennis Vogel, 1927-1929, beloved brother." His courage brought truth to light. Michael's grave already existed, but Lorna had a new marker installed. The old one, the one from when everyone thought he'd drowned accidentally, had been vague, almost apologetic. The new one told the truth. Michael Bell, 1978 and 1999, murdered for seeking justice. His sister never stopped fighting for him. At the memorial service, people spoke about the victims, shared memories, told stories, reminded everyone that these weren't just names in a case file, but real people with dreams and futures that had been stolen from them. When it was Lorna's turn to speak, she walked to the front slowly, aware that many of these people had avoided her for decades, had believed the lies about Michael, had been complicit in the cover-up through their silence, if nothing else. But she wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned itself out somewhere during the trial, leaving behind something clearer, cleaner. "My brother Michael," she began, her voice steady, "wasn't a troubled kid. He wasn't reckless or self-destructive. He was brave. He saw something wrong and tried to make it right, and it cost him his life. For 26 years, I've carried the weight of that loss alone. But now, standing here, I realize I was never really alone. Other families were suffering the same loss, asking the same questions. And eventually, when we found each other, when we shared our stories, the truth came out." She paused, looked at Joanne. "Justice took a long time. Too long, but it came. And I hope that brings some measure of peace to everyone who loved these 3 young people. They deserved better than what happened to them. They deserved to live full lives, to grow old, to be here with us now. Since we can't give them that, the least we can do is remember them honestly. Remember them as the good people they were, who died because they refused to look away from wrongdoing." After the service, Several people approached her, apologizing, explaining, trying to make peace with their own complicity. Some of their words were genuine, others felt hollow. Lorna accepted them all with grace, understanding that forgiveness was a process, not an event. Mr. Talbot from the general store shook her hand. "I should have asked more questions back then. Should have spoken up. You were kind to me when others weren't," Lorna replied. "That mattered." Mrs. Kopp from the library embraced her. "Your brother would be proud of you." "I hope so." Cole Finnegan approached hesitantly. He'd been released from custody, serving his probation, working to rebuild his life. "I know I don't deserve it," he said quietly, "but I hope someday you might forgive me." Lorna looked at him for a long moment. "You told the truth when it mattered most. That counts for something. The rest we'll see." The gathering lasted into the evening. As the sun set and people began to leave, Joanne found Lorna outside, looking at the mountains in the distance. "What now?" Joanne asked. "What do you do after you spent 23 years searching for answers and you finally get them?" Lorna smiled. "I don't know. I've been so focused on this for so long, I haven't thought about what comes after. Come stay with me for a while," Joanne offered. "In Fairmont. You don't have to be alone anymore. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else. Then learn. We both will." Joanne took her hand. "We've been through too much together to just walk away now. Your family, Lorna, the family we chose." The offer touched something deep in Lorna. For 23 years, she'd convinced herself she was better off alone, that isolation was protection. But Joanne was right. They'd built something real through their shared struggle, something worth holding on to. "I'll think about it," Lorna said. "But first, I need to go home. Just for a while. The cabin, the ridge, I need to see it with new eyes. Without the weight of all this pressing down." "I understand. But promise me you'll come visit. Regular visits, not just emergencies." "I promise." They drove back to Killdeer Ridge together, talking easily now about ordinary things, gardening plans, book recommendations, the weather. When they reached Lorna's cabin, Joanne helped her carry supplies inside, then prepared to head back down the mountain. "Thank you," Lorna said at the doorway. "For everything. For not giving up. For believing me. For being here. Thank you for finishing what our brothers started. For making sure their deaths meant something." After Joanne left, Lorna stood on her porch and looked out over the familiar landscape. The forest was green now, alive with spring growth. Birds called from the trees. A deer moved through the meadow below, grazing peacefully. Everything looked the same as it had for 23 years. But everything was different. She was different. Over the following weeks, Lorna began to change her life in small ways. She drove to town more often, stayed longer, had actual conversations with people. She accepted an invitation to dinner from Mrs. Kopp. She helped Mr. Talbot stock shelves one afternoon when his usual helper was sick. The Forest Service, true to Agent Morris's suggestion, hired her as a consultant. They wanted her knowledge of the ridge, her understanding of the terrain, her expertise in tracking and wildlife management. It was part-time, flexible, and it gave her purpose beyond simple survival. She also started writing. At first just notes, memories of Michael, stories about their childhood. But gradually it evolved into something more, a full account of what had happened from her perspective. Not for publication necessarily, but to have a record, to make sure the truth was preserved in her own words. Joanne visited 3 times that spring and summer. They hiked together, cooked meals, sat on the porch watching storms roll in over the mountains. The friendship deepened, becoming something neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. In August, on what would have been Michael's 46th birthday, Lorna visited his grave. She brought wildflowers from the ridge, the kind he used to pick for her when they were kids. "I miss you," she said, kneeling beside the marker. "Every day. But I'm okay now. I'm finally okay. You were right about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs everything. The truth matters. You taught me that." A breeze moved through the cemetery, warm and gentle. Lorna closed her eyes and let it wash over her, feeling like a benediction. She thought about the shed in the woods, about the rusted door that had opened onto so much pain and ultimately so much healing. It was still there, marked now with crime scene tape that would eventually weather away, leaving just the structure itself. The Forest Service planned to remove it eventually, but for now it stood as a monument to secrets revealed, to truths uncovered, to justice delayed but not denied. As autumn approached, Lorna made a decision. She would keep the cabin, keep coming to the ridge. It was her home, her sanctuary, and she wasn't ready to leave it completely. But she would also spend time in Fairmont with Joanne. She would maintain connections, build relationships, stop hiding from a world that had hurt her but could also heal her. On her last visit before winter set in, she stood at the edge of the ridge and looked down at ridgeline in the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys. Lights twinkled in the growing darkness. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. She thought about forgiveness, about whether she could truly forgive the town for its years of complicity and silence. The answer was complicated. Some wounds ran too deep for easy forgiveness. But she could choose to move forward. She could choose to build a future that wasn't defined entirely by the past. And that, she thought, was enough. As she turned back toward her cabin, a movement caught her eye. The elk, the one she'd been tracking all those months ago when this journey began. It stood in a clearing, healthy now, its coat thick and ready for winter. It looked at her for a long moment, unafraid, then bounded away into the trees. Lorna smiled. Some things healed, some things survived, and some things, like truth and justice, could wait decades to emerge, but would always eventually find their way into the light. She walked back to her cabin as the first stars appeared overhead, feeling something she hadn't felt in 23 years. Not just peace, though there was that. Not just relief, though she felt that too. Hope. Hope that the future could be different than the past. Hope that healing was possible even after profound loss. Hope that courage and persistence could change things, could matter, could make the world just a little more right than it had been before. Inside her cabin, she lit a fire, made tea, and sat at her table with the photograph one last time. Michael's face looked back at her, young and alive and trusting. She touched the image gently. "We did it," she whispered. "Rest easy now, little brother. Rest easy." Outside, the wind moved through the pines, carrying with it the promise of snow, of winter, of seasons that would continue to turn whether anyone marked them or not. But this time, Lorna wouldn't face the winter alone. She had Joanne's number programmed into her phone. She had people in town who greeted her by name. She had purpose and connection, and the knowledge that she'd done something important, something that mattered. She'd given voice to the voiceless. She'd brought light to darkness. She'd finished what her brother started, and in doing so, she'd found